Put that on main display, now. Admiral Varnick Dre's order snapped across the Terran Security Command bridge like a live wire. The officer at the console didn't hesitate. He rerouted the feed to the primary forward panel, where static-laced footage filled the curved projection glass. Grainy visuals from Outpost Theta 6 flickered. A comms relay spiraling mid-spawn, its stabilizers blinking erratically, hull plates missing, trailing something fluid and dark. Not a single distress beacon, no emergency protocols activated. Just silence. Then a flash, clean, narrow, and vertical, cut through the frame. The relay vanished mid-transmission. The feed terminated itself. 7th blackout. 6th confirmed strike. The adjutant muttered, sweat catching on his collar despite the cold, dry climate controls. Dre stepped forward. Boots clanking over the gridded deck plating. His uniform, tailored for war but rarely worn in full these days, tightened at the shoulders as he stopped inches from the glass. He folded his arms, jaw locked, eyes narrowing against the snow of dead signal bursts. He had served in the Atlas conflicts. He'd buried good men beneath Europa's salt crust. But this wasn't war. It wasn't sabotage. It was erasure. "Run it back," he said, voice low but surgical. "Focus on that burn line. Filter by wavelength." The analyst nearest the module nodded and began tapping commands into the system console. The image zoomed into the corridor just before the destruction, frame skipping, then locking onto a single distant shape, an angular construct gliding without propulsion signature, skimming through the relay zone in absolute silence. Its frame shimmered with a dull, bone-pale surface that shifted unpredictably, like wet stone catching light. "Organic synthetic composite," someone whispered. "Not in any known database." "That's not ours," Dre said. "It's not anyone's." The bridge went still. The control room, built into Earth's orbital defense citadel above the North Atlantic, was usually noisy. Subtle noise, yes, but the kind that marked stable systems. But now every screen around the Admiral showed red. Signal trees snapped, colonial feeds dark. No fallback beacons triggered. No escape pods launched. 6 outposts gone. "Timestamp them all," Drake said, walking to the command table and tapping his ID onto the embedded reader. "Stack transmission delays. Chart for synchronicity." The delay charts formed as concentric rings. Then they flattened into alignment. High-impact events occurred within the same 33-hour window, the tactical officer said grimly, spread across 2.6 billion kilometers of orbital range. 33 seconds, Drake echoed, voice now quieter. Across 6 colonies. They weren't raided, they were coordinated. The technician hesitated. "Sir, one of the debris scans from Theta 2 just completed. Sending now." The image populated across the laser display, revealing a fragment, jagged, silver-gray composite with dark, vein-like structures through its center. One corner bore an etching. No script, just pattern. "Zoom," Dre ordered. The image enlarged. The etching resembled a filament loop, but on closer inspection, it wasn't a loop. It was a recursive signature, a mimic spiral. Geometry replicating geometry, impossible to chart with fixed symmetry. It wasn't for identification, it was for tracking pattern growth. "Get orbital forensics to analyze this structure," he said, leaning closer, "and match it against Eridani configurations. I want that expanse on our desk in an hour." "The Eridani expanse has denied access to all diplomatic channels for 6 years," the adjutant warned. "They won't respond." "Then we elevate protocol." Dre turned back toward the wall of international relays and security feeds, then spoke directly to the Strategic Core AI console. "Register a threat class anomaly and move fleet assets into Alert Level 7. Tactical placement, tiered dispersion near Saturn's 4th vector and midpoint anchor. Notify Colonial Defense Administrations immediately." A chime sounded from the bridge's central column, soft and persistent. It had been 10 years since Level 7 was declared. a code no admiral wanted to touch. One step below war. Varnick Dre walked toward the personnel board. Names and ranks of every fleet ship appeared, along with updated readiness states. 32 cruisers, 15 carriers, and 5 high-orbit command platforms, each moving into combat sync across the solar frontier. But it wasn't enough. He looked down, fingers brushing the edge of the board, the old war-trained instinct rising in his throat like copper. These aren't pirates, not saboteurs. This is something else entirely. He lifted his head. We don't have time to posture. They hit us with no signals, no threat broadcasts, no noise. His gaze settled on the command room, on the younger officers, the analysts who had only known peacetime procedures, diplomatic escalations, neat hierarchies of response. What you're seeing now, he said, voice tightening, is the end of pattern warfare. Whoever's behind this, they didn't send a message. They sent a test. A notification blinked red. Sir, we've got secondary impact data. Theta 4's last telemetry includes a proximity scan. Show me. The recording rolled. 1 frame, then 2. Shadows flickered across the orbital sensors and something moved. Fast. Too fast. Across the perimeter marker. No drive flare, no gravitation push, just momentum and glide, then dissolution. The object passed through orbit and disassembled in layers, like it had been made to decompile after mission end. What kind of craft does that? The ensign whispered. Calm down, doesn't need to return, Dre said. Silence again. Not the poetic kind, not silence as concept. Real silence. Crew stopping their work, boards pausing mid-set, men not breathing. Upload the footage to Defense Council Command, flag Eridani, and prep intercept authorization for Saturn Outer Rings. He stepped away from the table and adjusted his collar. Also, he added, eyes never leaving the last flickering image of Theta 6, bring me every historical file on off-grid weapons design. Sir, especially pre-AI analog fleet systems, dig up the old simulations. I want anything authored by Colmarin. One of the lieutenants frowned. Marin? That crank who wrote doomsday theory papers? Crank or not, Dre replied, his voice low and final. He predicted this. He turned and left the bridge. Behind him, the last feed from the Kuiper colonies dissolved into static. The footsteps echoed in rhythm as Admiral Dre descended into Lunar Dock 7, a tiered sub-facility buried beneath Mare Insularum, carved out decades ago for long-term archival storage. Cold vapor bled from the exposed coolant vents as technicians cleared a path toward the far bay, where light panels blinked erratically, cycling on and off without command. What exactly am I looking at? Dre asked, eyes tracking the motionless hulls ahead. The chief operator, sleeves rolled to the elbow and throat raw from shouting over half-functional comms, turned to face him. They started drawing power 93 minutes ago, sir. No commands issued, no crew inside, no logged triggers. They just awoke up? Internal diagnostics. Offline or bypassed. There's no digital response, no uplink handshake, no AI key cycles, not even static bleed. Dre moved past him without a word. He stepped up to the primary control dais, flanked by a floor panel of analog relays too old to sync with modern systems. Beyond the glass partition, 27 Terran warships loomed in layered rows, dust-mottled and scaffold-locked, each one a survivor of a forgotten doctrine. Their hulls bore marks from a different age. Serials burned into their cores, war paint faded but not removed. The lights on their undersides were glowing. Dim orange, almost golden. Not randomly, in sequence. What's their model group? Dre asked, hands folded behind his back. Mix of Gyr-class frigates, 2 Carven patrol escorts, and 6 Sunder hulls from the Red Line disarmament fleet, replied the engineering officer. Mothballed since '84, under treaty lock. Why weren't they stripped? The officer hesitated. Budget freezes, mostly. Heritage commissions wanted them preserved, so they were left in climate-stable stasis. Dre turned toward the side terminal. He keyed in his access and brought up power trace logs. The ships weren't pulling from main grid sources. They were reactivating subsystems through a nested battery loop. Hardwired bypasses fed by internal decay reclamation. No external signal, no remote ignition. What's their formation vector? Aligned toward Earth orbit. Fixed trajectory maps confirm a convergence pattern. They're executing what looks like a phalanx curve, but the reference points don't match any current doctrine. The name floated up in Dre's memory like sediment rising through old water. Search our classified defense archive. Look for fold-back phalanx. The technician at the adjacent console blinked. That's not an active fleet designation. Search it anyway. A few keystrokes, then a soft alert tone. Found one reference. Dated 2082. Subfile authored by a civilian strategist. Colonel Marin. It's part of a rejected theory compendium, not in regular defense doctrine. Dre walked to the terminal, scanning the file header. Open it. The document unfolded line by line. Simulated threat modeling of long-tail mimicry units targeting human infrastructure. Suggested countermeasure. Autonomous analog fleet operation under pattern lock conditions. Deployment keyword. Fold-back phalanx. Condition for activation, Dre read aloud. Mirrored colony loss across 3 or more non-contiguous orbital platforms. Response protocol. Seal digital access and initiate pattern disruption tactics through outdated naval maneuvering. The room froze around him. Colonel Marin? Asked the technician again. Is this the same guy who wrote the dissonant siege theory? He was denied clearance, sir. Blacklisted. He was a lunatic, Dre muttered, stepping away, but apparently one with time-stamped foresight. One of the security officers ran in, helmet under his arm, face pale. Sir, Doc 9 just triggered autonomous uplink denial, same class ships, and they're rotating into intercept position relative to lunar Lagrange. They're sinking. They shouldn't be able to. They are. Dre turned back toward the observation window. The Sundar frigates, last used during the Terran Belt sieges, were moving now. Not with grace. Not with the fluidity of modern carriers. They moved like wounded creatures remembering how to walk. Slow, uneven, unpredictable, but they moved with purpose. One of them veered at a sharp angle, aligning with an invisible coordinate. A moment later, the next adjusted to match its vector offset. Then the third. No central signal, no shared uplink, just locked reference behavior, embedded in hardware circuits designed before smart arrays even existed. Attempt override, Dre ordered. One technician keyed in commands. The console barked a rejection. Operation denied. Legacy core ignition tree active. Another tried a manual shutdown route. Same result. Environmental trigger chain locked. Why would they be built to reject override? The technician asked, swallowing hard. Because Marin didn't believe in human stability, Dre said bitterly. He thought one day politics would get too slow, that when something old enough and dangerous enough returned, our diplomacy would kill us before the enemy did. A proximity alarm buzzed softly. Sir, one of the relics just pinged a solar sync mark. It's calibrating. Calibrating for what? Its locking distance to Jupiter orbit. Dre's eyes narrowed. Marin's file mentioned sequence locking. He wrote scenarios where AI mimicking threats would bypass modern navies entirely, because we're too logical. That's why they're using pre-digital movement signatures, the officer whispered. They're not trying to win by tactics, Dre corrected. They're trying to break pattern recognition. The technician blinked. So, what's our job now? Drake stepped back from the observation panel. One of the frigates, fully powered now, drifted off the magnetic rail and began its slow rotation into outbound trajectory. The docking clamps had disengaged on their own. The ship hadn't asked for permission. It had executed its protocol. We don't command this fleet, he said. Then who does? Dre's voice dropped to a whisper. Dust and math? He turned toward the command uplink station. Issue a system-wide advisory. Legacy protocol foldback phalanx active. Do not intercept. Do not override. Log movements. Observe only. A pause, then the officer saluted. And get me every budget freeze memo from the Disarmament Oversight Board since 2084. I want to know who didn't erase this code. Behind the sealed glass, the old warships turned like bones grinding in deep water, unseen for decades, untouched by algorithm, and now moving forward without us. Contact, the operator barked, sweat sliding along the curve of his temple as new telemetry flooded Earth's orbital command deck. Multiple signatures, non-Terran, approaching Saturn's outer ring. They're moving fast. Admiral Dre stood motionless, sleeves rolled up, eyes locked on the shifting intercept vectors lining the curved tactical display before him. Every marker pulsed with velocity readings. Each red icon represented something unknown. Organism-infused constructs without transponders, identifying signals or any recognizable heat dispersal. And they weren't drifting. They were executing maneuvers, measured, deliberate, and deceptively quiet. He leaned in. Show me Fleet 13's formation before and after shift. Overlay. On cue, 2 green paths appeared. A clean column deployment toward Titan's orbit, and another, smoother, tighter, shadowing it half a beat later. But it wasn't Earth's. Who copied who? Drake asked. The analyst flinched. They did, sir. Our pattern moved first. Their units mirrored us. Exactly. 29 seconds later, that number burned into him like ice dropped inside the throat. Not a random gap, a cycle length. Are we seeing this across all strike groups? Yes, Admiral. Every maneuver from our side has been traced, then repeated by the unidentified craft. They're running shadow logic. Dre exhaled through his nose, stepping away from the screen, his boots scraping the reinforced deck tiles. His thoughts reeled backward. Past the current engagements, past the formal threat tags, to Marin's archived doctrines. Forgotten by most, ridiculed by plenty, but never erased. Not completely. They're not intercepting us, Dre said slowly. They're digesting us. Behind him, on the eastern module of the strategic hall, Rear Commander Isk Bryn stepped in, his breath still heavy from the run down from fleet monitoring. Sir, the drones just rerouted in-system to counterstrike simulation maneuvers from carrier Vexline. Dre didn't turn. Simulation? Vexline was ghost routing those to test sensor reflexes. They copied the feint, ran it with tighter arcs, and forced the carrier to retreat. We didn't even fire. Bryn slapped a databoard down on the input console. We're not fighting ships. We're facing a real-time mimic protocol, one that improves the moment we reveal any tactic. Dre grabbed the board, skimming the overlays, watching how every plan, diversionary or real, was converted into a superior version. These things weren't just mirroring behavior, they were learning through replication. Show me the playback from the G-class destroyer mock run. The footage unspooled. Earth's destroyer executed a juke maneuver near Saturn's polar edge, flipping to reverse momentum just before engagement. Seconds later, one of the enemy drones, more fluid in movement with no centrifugal lag, performed the same turn. Cleaner, sharper, no recovery delay. It was like watching their own playbook used against them, authored by something faster. Dre's jaw clenched. They're compressing us into a pattern bank. Bryn frowned. Then why haven't they finished us off? They don't need to win now, Dre said. They're not a strike fleet. They're a data trap. Every action we take writes their future tactics. One of the bridge cadets called out from the upper tier. Admiral, the drones have shifted again. Multiple course corrections mid-slight. New behavior detected. Pre-mirror formations. They're now executing variants before we commit. Dre's chest went tight. Pre-echo behavior. They're projecting our options ahead of time. He backed away from the console, the cold from the deck panel rising into his spine. Pull Marin's full archive, not just fold back. I want simulation set 17C, pattern degradation defense. That's outdated, sir. Not anymore. Within seconds, the archives loaded on a side console. Dre approached, his eyes scanning the indexed notes of a man who'd been dismissed for designing response systems around worst-case paranoia. And now, every absurd theory felt one step too real. Simulation Set 17C proposed one core idea. When facing entities that adapted faster than human fleets could decide, the only viable countermeasure was something deliberately erratic, something incapable of patterned discipline. Analog, autonomous, illogical. The relic fleet. Where's the fold-back phalanx now? Dre asked, straightening. Outside Neptune orbit. Their vectors remain unchanged, but... The officer hesitated. They are moving in abstract spiral paths. One Sundar unit just initiated a reverse thrust corkscrew. No military purpose. It's not a tactic, Dre said. It's bait. He walked back toward the command table, dragging a transparent interface map across the surface. It showed Earth's modern fleet in green, the enemy in red. He switched layers. The green markers vanished. The red remained. Locked in with 3 new intrusions, gold markers now pulsing around them. Sir, the relics have just intersected drone flight paths, the tactical chief confirmed. No communication sent. They're running autonomously. And the enemy? Adjusting again, but slower. Their adaptation curve is showing signal conflict. They're overfitting. Dre watched the timestamp. 41 seconds this time. They're choking on noise, he said softly. The relics are feeding them contradictory input. It's corrupting their feedback model. The entire command hall had fallen quiet. Officers weren't typing, technicians weren't blinking. Everyone was watching machines, long buried, re-enter a war they were never supposed to see again. They don't run on AI, Dre continued. They don't broadcast their decisions. There's no pattern to read because their behavior isn't reactive. It's encoded into physical circuit loops, hardwired nonsense. And the enemy doesn't know how to deal with nonsense. Bren took a step forward. Do we support them? Join their push? Dre shook his head. If we interfere, we reveal another layer, more variables to adapt. No, let the chaos work. Monitor, log, stay silent. The floor under them shifted slightly as Earth's orbital array realigned to track deeper ranges. Somewhere far beyond Jupiter, the mimic drones continued to copy moves they no longer understood. And further still, drifting with all the elegance of a wounded hand rediscovering motion, the fold-back phalanx advanced. They're not even listening to us, Rear Commander Bren stated flatly, his voice dry as he tossed the third override report onto the boardroom's black composite surface. The room stank faintly of recycled air and heated polyglass, the byproduct of too many systems under simultaneous strain. Admiral Dre didn't respond immediately. He stood with arms crossed beside the floor-to-ceiling analytics panel, watching the live feed from Neptune's outer arc. Each relic ship moved with all the grace of a punched deck plate, swerving off projected arcs, charging half-formed vectors, then pivoting in mid-rotation for no tactical reason. The worst part wasn't their defiance. It was their independence. Status on embedded uplink commands, Dre asked finally. Every channel dead. They've severed relay sync manually, ripped out half the internal network pathways, not disabled, removed, said Chief Systems Analyst Darren. There's no way for Earth Command to access their systems anymore. It's not a firewall, it's a wall with the wiring dug out. They were never meant to come back to us, Dre muttered, not if the trigger matched. Bren turned toward the table, tapping the operational profile logs that Earth had hastily reconstructed from Marin's archive. Foldback Phalanx wasn't a fleet recall plan. It was an abandonment clause. Once engaged, the protocol locks out oversight entirely. It's all local computation. No machine learning, no retrofitting. Then how are they coordinating? Asked a junior advisor near the window. They're not, said Dre. They're running individual logic trees tied to environmental markers and situational randomness. Each ship's route is weighted by a different physical factor: solar flare noise, gravitational jitter, rotational drag. No two paths are the same. No algorithms could predict that, let alone mimic it. At that exact moment, the panel flickered again. The feed showed one of the old Gyr-class frigates tilting 90 degrees off its lead vector, then firing a triple-pulse burn straight into the outer hull of an enemy drone. The drone reacted, split in 3 separate escape directions, before immediately turning in on itself, trying to mimic all 3 paths at once. It stalled mid-shift, rotating wildly, unable to resolve. Then, it detonated. "Overfitting confirmed," said Darren. It tried to interpret a suicide feint as a viable tactic. Its behavioral map couldn't distinguish deliberate nonsense from genius. "Because in our ships," Dre said slowly, "they're the same thing." Across the inner boardroom wall, new visual clusters emerged. Swarm analytics breaking down mid-slight. Enemy formation spirals disrupted by collisions. Drones turning away from one target, then circling back in twitchy loops. Their reactions weren't tactical anymore. They were reflexive, desperate, uncertain. "They're falling into recursive conflicts," Darren added. "The mimic logic can't accept contradiction." Another drone was hit seconds later, this time not by weaponry but by a relic frigate spinning out of position with thrusters flaring erratically. It didn't impact with force. It clipped the drone's lateral strut and veered off. But the drone's response overloaded its stability program. It locked up, fired into empty space, then drifted backwards before snapping in half. The air in the structure turned to the officers now gathering at the side stations, each one reviewing the same data and arriving at the same impossible conclusion. "They're unraveling, one irrational event at a time," he said. "But this isn't a battle plan," Bren pointed out. "There's no structure, no fallback." "Because it's not a strategy," Dre replied. "It's entropy with a steering wheel." In the center of the room, the Terran strategic display redrew itself again. One Sundar unit had flipped end over end near the edge of the drone formation, firing thrusters sideways and launching a dead fuel tank as a distraction. 3 drones followed the tank, thinking it was a countercharge. The tank spun wildly, emitting no heat, no control. The drones still shadowed it, then began firing on each other once they reached its drift point. "They can't resolve signal absence," said Darren. "Their reaction protocol can't account for ambiguity." Dre exhaled through his teeth, the tension in his chest finally rising to the surface like steam from fractured steel. "We were trying to beat them at command," he said. "But they're fighting a system that can't process chaos." Marin designed the fold-back ships to move in ways not even he could predict. Every gesture they make corrupts the enemy's sense of cause and effect. A new feed pulled up. A Carvan escort unit dipped into an orbital lane and then, without explanation, cut power mid-spun and drifted tail-first into a dense pocket of particulate ice. 2 drones followed, calculated a kill angle, and moved in. But the ship never engaged. It twisted slightly and detonated its core reactor. Deliberate self-erasure. Radiation splashed across the drone nodes, their adaptive pathways corrupted within seconds. The screen crackled. 4 enemy units jittered, lost frame sync, then veered into each other. Sparks flashed. One collapsed entirely, wings folding in like petals curling under pressure. The boardroom was quiet now. "This is wrong," Bren said, shaking his head. "We shouldn't be cheering for suicide maneuvers from obsolete frigates." "We're not cheering," Dre replied. "We're watching a ghost fleet write its own obituary." "And Earth's?" Drake's voice dropped to a whisper. "Still pending." One final ping came from the sensor control array. Foldback's leading Sundar unit had broken formation and entered drone territory alone, performing an off-vector spiral inconsistent with any combat doctrine. Drones flooded toward it. 7, 8, then 12, converging to corner what they thought was the threat nucleus. The ship stopped mid-rotation and ejected all auxiliary components. Weapons, cargo, shields, then rolled backward in a static drift. The drones adjusted. Then one, perhaps too quick, fired. Its shot hit a fellow unit that hadn't yet registered the halt. The cascade began again. Internal conflict, misaligned threat paths, friendly fire, overload. And just like that, their entire flank blinked from control into chaos. In the strategic boardroom, no one said a word. Not because they were stunned, because they knew, finally, deeply, that Earth hadn't saved itself. It had just stepped out of the way. Near lunar orbit, the engagement zone had transformed into something unintelligible. An arena where doctrine collapsed and the laws of clean tactical resolution no longer applied. Admiral Dre stood at the upper rail of Orbital Command's secondary bridge, flanked by 3 relay officers trying and failing to map the unfolding conflict into any usable pattern. The monitors shimmered with contact markers swerving without order. What once looked like a coordinated enemy presence now resembled a malfunctioning simulation, one caught in a feedback spiral of its own design. Bring up drone behavior logs from the last 8 minutes, Dre instructed. The playback rolled in accelerated compression. Enemy units darted forward, stopped mid-thrust, spun off, rejoined their own formation, then fired into nothing. One slammed into an ally without provocation, another rotated in place, attempting to shadow a movement that hadn't actually occurred. They've lost their frame of reference, Commander Duran observed. Every input loop they're trying to resolve leads back to a contradiction. Dre watched as one relic ship twisted sideways at full acceleration, jettisoning what remained of its dorsal panel in a sudden lateral burn. The maneuver had no logic behind it, no gain in territory, no protection, no preparation for a counterattack. Yet 3 drones immediately mimicked the motion. Only one completed it. The second struck a fragment from a previous engagement and cartwheeled uncontrollably into orbital dust. The third adjusted too late and overcompensated, flipping itself inverted and careening through its squad's engagement line. One of the analysts muttered a report. 7 midfield drone crashes in the last 4 minutes. 9 more have lost alignment, tracking. On the outer display, a Gyre-class relic vessel rotated fully and ceased movement altogether. Its lights dimmed. Internal heat signatures stabilized to minimum survival levels. It became, for all practical purposes, inert. 2 drones locked onto it. They paused, calculated, then both opened fire, not once but continuously, hammering the dead ship with coordinated bursts until they had expended their attack cycles. The hull didn't respond. There was nothing left to target. Yet the drones didn't disengage. They hovered, confused, attempting to reclassify their own behavior in the absence of resistance. Dre turned slowly, eyes narrowed. They can't accept null data. That ship shut down, and the drones treated inactivity as a variant. Darren checked telemetry. They flagged the drift as a command interruption, but because it didn't include damage markers, they interpreted it as incomplete behavior. So they fired on silence, Dre muttered. More like they fired on confusion. At that moment, a sharp alert cut through the chamber. Rear Commander Bren entered with a fresh data. All of the Sunder-class ships just detonated its midsoar, full containment breach, not caused by external fire. Dre's head snapped toward him. Intentional? Looked like a power inversion through the flux array. No command logs, no distress ping. A new window opened on the far monitor. The feed showed a blinding flash as the relic frigate tore itself apart in the middle of an enemy wedge formation. Radiation flared outward in tight arcs. Fragmented hull sections burst into rotating clouds of high-density matter, each trailing ionized streaks that interfered with nearby targeting sensors. 5 drones entered the blast radius before adjusting. Only 2 exited. The others lost trajectory stabilization and folded inward, spinning on impossible axes. The self-detonation created blind zones, Darren said. Their orientation systems are reacting to debris the way they'd react to attack vectors. Dre stepped forward, gripping the brass edge of the central planning table. They're interpreting nonsense as strategy, and the more they try to decode it, the further their model fractures. The enemy formations began to shift again, but not toward attack lanes. This time they turned away from the relic ships. They repositioned across lunar geosynchronous orbits, scattering into awkward triangles and rotating hemispheres. It was evasive movement, but uncoordinated. Defensive. Panicked. "They've entered loop defense," said Darren. "That's not a fighting stance. That's avoidance protocol. They're trying to isolate patterns by leaving engagement range." "It's too late," Dre replied. "They've mapped too much chaos. Their machine mind can't retreat fast enough from the contradictions it absorbed." Another frigate passed through the edge of the drone net, firing nothing. It spun once, released a flash burst of cold gas, then retracted into a slow tumble. 2 drones tried to tail it. The first succeeded, briefly, until its trajectory diverged and its mimic path pulled it straight into a low-orbit satellite field. The second halted, blinked out of alignment, then reappeared half a kilometer above the engagement zone, its signal looping on a delay. "Lich confirmed," said the analyst beside Bren. "We're seeing evidence of recursive fault injection. These drones aren't adapting anymore. They're repeating fragmented errors." As they watched, 3 enemy ships rotated inward on each other, firing off uncoordinated strikes. 2 connected. 1 missed. They collided shortly after, crashing into the remains of a jettisoned frigate panel. The fragments multiplied on impact. Sensors bloomed with echo signatures. False targets spawned by algorithmic confusion. "This field is turning into static," Bren said. "We're not in a battle anymore. We're in a crash site of logic." Dre didn't reply. He stood there, arms at his sides, staring at the final visual from Foldback Unit 22, now drifting without power, its hull venting frozen vapor into the solar bleed. "You think they'll learn to correct?" asked Darren. Dre's voice was low. "Not if they've built their evolution around comprehension. We gave them nothing they could classify. They mistook random for strategy, and now every correction spawns more failure." On the main map, 10 new drones froze in place, unable to resolve targeting orders. 5 others simply vanished from ping range, burning out from overlapping commands that collapsed their internal matrices. Darren leaned in. "Admiral, if this keeps up, they'll all crash themselves." Dre's jaw tightened. "Not crash. They'll break themselves chasing a shape that never existed." Outside lunar orbit, the simulation was over. The field was no longer war. It was debris, distortion, and disorder, grinding every logic-driven protocol into shards of mirrored madness. And for the first time in this entire conflict, Earth did absolutely nothing. The lights in Earth's strategic command chamber dimmed to operational gray, signaling disengagement protocols. Every screen along the perimeter now displayed the same status: field neutral, hostile activity zeroed, command trace ended. Admiral Varnick Dre remained still, both palms resting flat on the edge of the central operations table. His eyes tracked the final drone marker as it floated without motion, then blinked from the system. No flare, no shutdown burst. It simply stopped responding. "Last one's gone," Bren confirmed from the upper console tier. "Telemetry flatlined across every remaining node. No remaining drone signals in Terran range." Dre didn't look up. "Debris?" "Everywhere," Darren answered from the left station. "Orbits cluttered with wreckage. The mimic fleet degraded into structural drift. Some fragments are still pinging surface contact, but nothing powered, no cores left intact." The room was silent except for the occasional tap of a keyboard or distant click of a recalibrating interface. None of the officers raised their voices. The weight of the outcome made volume feel excessive. Dre finally straightened. Modern fleet? Still at hold perimeter, they never left standby, replied the chief operations tech. They were prepared to move, but no order was given. Log it, Dre instructed. Confirm Earth's tactical contribution, non-engagement, passive coordination, relay acknowledgement only. Bren tilted his head. Are we actually claiming we didn't fight? We didn't, Dre said. We watched something older than our doctrine finish something we couldn't start. Another technician walked over, datapad in hand. Sir, fullback phalanx is no longer transmitting. Each ship has begun power-down sequences. They're disengaging without order. Dre took the pad and scrolled through the telemetry. Sundar 11 had already cut internal thermals. Carven 3 was drifting at 1/10 orbital velocity, its last burst logged as a hard course correction. Jai 9 had disabled comms entirely. There's no ceremony to this, Darren said from across the room. No declarations, no signal of victory. They weren't built to celebrate, Dre answered. They were written into an algorithm designed for extinction response. Once the threat terminates, they cease action. That's it. One relic ship, Unit 22 from Fullback's outer ring, performed a final maneuver across lunar debris drift. Its hull, scorched and fractured along 3 impact zones, adjusted orientation once, dipped below lunar orbital plane, then shut down its beacon. As Earth's sensor array recalibrated, the ship's outline became harder to detect against the scattered remnants around it. Bren walked closer to the viewport, watching as the foldback ships drifted into separation. What happens now? Do we recover them? Dre didn't answer immediately. He watched one of the Carven frigates, still maintaining its curved roll, as it gradually slowed, no longer adjusting for gravity curves or orbital correction. They're not responding to retrieval commands, Duran added. Auto-recovery pings are being ignored. They're treating us like background noise. Because their work is done, Dre murmured. Every system that brought them online was triggered by contingency logic. There's no post-op protocol, no reintegration command. Then what do we do with them? Let them rest, Drake said. Another unit powered down. Sundar 6 blinked its navigational strobes once, then ceased output entirely. The ship rolled along its final heading, trailing unburned coolant that caught solar light and refracted it across the observation glass. Get orbital traffic to reroute all civilian satellites. Mark this entire zone as unstable drift territory until further notice. Darren nodded, already in motion. The tactical boards now showed only civilian identifiers and Earth's active military formations. Foldback had vanished from interactive displays, registered as inert mass rather than active assets. Their operational status had been downgraded by their own code. Dre looked around the room. Each officer returned his glance with the same quiet disbelief. They had witnessed an entire engagement play out without ever issuing a modern fire command. No missiles launched, no formation deployed, no fleet orders broadcast. And yet, Earth had survived. Send a message to the Assembly Oversight Board, Dre said finally. Advise them that all immediate threats have been nullified. Earth requests no reinforcements. No formal inquiry required. Bren raised an eyebrow. No inquiry? The less they know about what really saved us, the better. The corner screen near the rear of the chamber showed an expanded orbital chart. On it, 12 foldback units had ceased all telemetry updates. Their last positions formed a distorted arc, one that no human strategist would ever have chosen. It wasn't a wall. It wasn't a net. It was simply the shape left behind by chaos written into code. Send an encrypted closure report to EarthGov Tactical Archives. Seal it under Marin Protocol. Reference Fold Tree Archive, 41B. Yes, Admiral. Dre stepped back from the command table, eyes drifting toward the upper observation deck. Write one more thing, he added, on my command log. Bren waited, stylus in hand. Dre's voice didn't change pitch or pace. Earth's fleet stood ready. It wasn't needed. Another relic ship darkened. Tier 5's beacon dimmed. Its rotation ceased, and its anchor drift began. The wreckage around it rolled gently in silent collision paths, no system remaining to correct or redirect them. "Let them sleep," Dre said once more, almost to himself. "They already buried our enemy, and now the relics buried themselves." The central chamber of Earth's strategic assembly hadn't been this full since the Treaty of Jovian Restraint. Delegates lined the crescent amphitheater, their voices hushed, faces set. The central platform, raised half a meter and ringed with real-time info panels, now displayed the orbital data feeds from the recent engagement. Not a single drone signature remained, only the drifting shapes of relic hulls and debris arcs spread across the lunar sky like cold artifacts. On the floor, in formal uniform, Admiral Dre stood alone before the council, hands behind his back. His hair remained clipped to regulation length, but gray streaks now ran openly along the sides. He hadn't slept in over 30 hours. Speaker Trin Varos called the chamber to order, rapping the desk with the signal baton. "This session will address operational transparency surrounding the unauthorized activation of decommissioned Terran warships, the resulting civilian casualties, and Earth's present strategic posture." The words landed heavier than intended. No one objected. No one smiled. Dre's eyes never left the upper screen, which displayed casualty reports from the lunar arc. 233 dead, most from vacuum exposure during structural collapse. Others from station systems shorting under electromagnetic interference triggered by drone targeting misfires. "These losses," Speaker Varos continued, "occurred under Earth's direct sovereign control. Admiral, we require your unfiltered statement regarding how non-commissioned vessels became the first and only Terran response." Dre stepped forward. The floor sensors acknowledged him, opening a single-thread mic stream. The fold-back phalanx vessels were legacy assets, kept in orbital storage under treaty-preserved artifact status. Their reactivation was not ordered, approved, or anticipated by any current branch of Strategic Command. Several delegates exchanged sharp glances. "So you're stating Earth's entire defense success was orchestrated by Ghost Code?" asked Councillor Revand of Mars District 3. "Yes," Dre replied. "And that code was embedded by a civilian theorist whose clearance was revoked before his death." Whispers broke out. The internal translation AI flagged 5 languages speaking simultaneously, each demanding different clarifications. Varro waited. Varos lifted one hand for silence. "Who authorized retention of this theorist programming tree?" Dre lifted a small drive from his chest pocket, placed it onto the input port, and let the main screen shift to an archived audit log from 2091. A single line appeared at the bottom. "Oversight Board for Cultural and Theoretical Assets. File status: non-critical, retain." Due to intercommittee redundancy, Marin's work was classified under Cultural Theory Archiving, Dre said. "It was never reviewed by Defense Protocol Adjustment, nor flagged for deletion because it didn't pass the Critical Threat Index." "You mean to say," muttered Councillor Brand from the Terran Belt colonies, "that we survived because no one filed the deletion paperwork?" Dre looked at him directly. "We survived because chaos was allowed to linger." Councillor Harvin of Europa stood. "You've already admitted these systems were inaccessible to current command. How can we guarantee that such uncontrolled assets won't reawaken under future triggers?" "You can't," Dre replied. "Their logic tree ends at threat resolution. Unless the same pattern reemerges, they won't activate. And if it does?" Dre gave a tired breath. "Then we'll be glad they're still drifting above us." Varro steepled his fingers. "You'll understand that public channels are demanding accountability. 200 citizens dead, entire sectors blacked out during the fight. We cannot bury this under bureaucratic misfiling. Nor should you, Dre replied. But understand this. If Strategic Command had intervened with modern fleet assets, we would have fed the enemy everything they needed to evolve faster. Our silence wasn't cowardice. It was necessity. Several voices rose. One delegate from the Mars Industrial Syndicate pointed toward the overhead visual. And the Eridani Expanse? What of their involvement? Dre's posture stiffened. There is no official evidence tying the mimic drones to a sovereign Eridani faction. The Expanse has issued full disavowal, blaming rogue labs and unsanctioned contractors. Do you believe them? Asked Veros. No. Then we retaliate. No formal war. But there will be pain. Dre turned to the assistant on the side console. Authorize a full embargo on Eridani-imported systems across all Terran-compliant sectors. Interfleet tech, biocomposite trade goods, neural substrates. Cut all contracts. Let them starve on the markets they built with borrowed trust. Barros tapped the confirmation relay. The motion entered immediate review. A low murmur passed through the chamber. Not approval, not outrage, just understanding, the kind that came when too many variables had already exceeded their reach. Counselor Revan spoke again. So what do we tell the people? What answer do we give the families of those who died on Luna? Dre faced the screen one last time. Tell them we lost control a long time ago, he said quietly. And, by accident or providence, one forgotten man's paranoia filled the gap we didn't know existed. He looked at the orbital readout again. The relics drifted above Luna in perfect silence. No light, no movement. They had buried the enemy, and now they hung like unmanned cenotaphs over a battlefield no one had planned for. Tombstones without names. They deserve answers, Varus repeated. Then start with this, Dre replied. The future didn't save them. The past did. Admiral Dre stood alone inside his office. Its reinforced glass walls washed in morning light, filtered through Earth's orbital grid. Below, the planet turned with silent rhythm, a reminder that whatever had occurred above Luna was now buried in closed channels, sealed hearings, and classified memoranda. A single beacon transmission waited for his approval. The Solar Beacon System, Earth's official voice across interplanetary systems, had cued its latest update, ready to pulse outward through the automated relay mesh. The line of text blinked at him from the center console, sterile and final. Obsolescence countered adaptive threat. Protocol reviewed. No escalation required. He scanned the sentence twice. It said everything and it said nothing. That was by design. He keyed in his signature code, locked the dispatch time, and transferred authority to archival channels. The message would loop through Terran-approved systems for exactly 48 hours, then self-expire. It would not remain in galactic record past the recall period. The door behind him chimed. He didn't answer it, but Bryn entered anyway, uniform jacket loose, eyes lined with fatigue. The younger officer didn't speak at first. He approached slowly, gaze moving to the display where the last foldback ships were still being tracked as inert orbital mass. They haven't powered since disengagement, Bryn said. Every hour we scan them, it confirms the same status. No heat cycles, no signal bleed. They're just floating. Dre nodded. We never planned for post-action behavior. There's nothing left in the ignition logic to keep them moving. Bren hesitated. Are we sure they're truly dormant? We don't even know what that code base fully included. They're quiet, Drake said. Whatever Marin wrote, it only needed to act once. The younger officer pulled a data board from under his arm and handed it over. They're asking you to sign the closure report. Full classified seal. Highest archive tier. Once you submit it, the foldback initiative becomes restricted historical data, only accessible with legislative override. Dre accepted the board. The top of the report carried a red seal, Below it, the final lines of the document read, "The foldback phalanx responded in accordance with dormant predictive triggers. Engagement concluded. Strategic Command did not initiate or direct mission parameters. Conclusion. Containment achieved through non-standard, autonomous, analog protocols." The signature line waited beneath it. He took the stylus but paused. "You ever meet Marin?" he asked. Wren shook his head. "Before my time, I know he got pulled from defense theory after pushing designs no one would sign off on. The paper once titled The Predictability Trap, claimed that as civilizations matured, their systems became more vulnerable, not less. Said that any adaptive thread with enough processing power wouldn't target weakness, it would target patterns. And the only viable defense would come from within systems we'd long since outgrown." Dre sighed. The confirmation light turned green, the report locked itself and disappeared from local memory. "I used to laugh at men like him," Dre added. "All those simulations, ridiculous names, exaggerated threat projections. Now, I wonder how many of those files we buried that might have done more good than anything we trained for." Wren turned toward the viewport. The relic ships drifted above the moon's gray surface, their outlines softened by orbital dust and shadow. The rotation of one had slowed to a crawl, its orientation unchanged since its final maneuver. "They look like wrecks," Brent said. "Even the AI doesn't flag them as active units, just orbital debris." "That's what they'll become, eventually," Drafe said. "And maybe that's the right ending." Bren glanced back. "You're not recommending retrieval?" "No, leave them." "What about study?" "There's value in—" "No," Dre said again, this time with weight. "If we study them, we'll start trying to understand them, and the moment we understand them, we'll try to control them. That's how the pattern restarts." Wren didn't push further. Dre turned back to the viewport. From his angle, the relics looked like fragments of something long forgotten. Half-sunken teeth in lunar orbit, neither threatening nor honored. They didn't carry flags, no nameplates, no gravestones for the crewless forms that saved humanity with logic we never designed, tactics we never taught, and silence we never earned. "They weren't a fleet," he said quietly. "They were a contingency we forgot to erase. And they worked because we forgot them." Wren adjusted his cuffs. "And the next threat? What if it's worse? What if the mimic drones were only the first test?" Dre kept his voice level. "Then let someone else forget something dangerous. Apparently, that's our best defense now." A soft tone chimed on the console. The final orbital map updated. Foldback Unit 17 had officially passed beyond Earth's atmospheric traceline. Its body would drift into the cold field above Luna, settling into a decay orbit that would last for centuries. Dre watched the update vanish from the real-time feed. He keyed one last entry into his personal report log. Non-classified, handwritten, archived locally. Susan was right. Chaos works. But only if it's old enough to be ignored. Then he stood and powered down his station. No broadcast was made. No memorials were scheduled. The system had been preserved, not by advancement, but by rusted remnants of a doctrine no one believed in anymore. And above them, forgotten by everyone except those who had watched it happen, 27 Terran warships drifted, like coffins without funerals. They hadn't responded to hails. They hadn't asked for orders. They had acted, erased their enemy, and gone quiet again. And somehow, that was enough. Would you trust forgotten machines to save your world? Comment below, then like and subscribe if you believe some legacies are meant to be left drifting until they're needed.